Hey everyone, welcome to this explainer. Look, if you're gearing up for your NET, SET, or JRF exams, or honestly, if you're just someone who loves digging into the really deep structural theories of Indian philosophy, you are exactly where you need to be. Today, we're unpacking one of the absolute most fascinating orthodox schools of Hindu thought, Mimamsa. But we aren't just skimming the surface here. No, we're diving straight into a historic, incredibly complex intellectual schism that literally split this entire school right down the middle.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here's a quick roadmap of where we're headed. We'll navigate this super dense philosophical territory together, step by step. We're going to start with the absolute baseline of Mimamsa, roll right into that great intellectual duel I mentioned, break down how they actually viewed knowledge, untangle their totally brilliant theories of error, and finally, wrap up with what they thought about the self and karma.
But before we start throwing heavy terminology around, I really want you to hold on to this one core question. If a text, in our case the Vedas, is considered absolutely eternal and unauthored by any human or God, well, how do we actually interpret its meaning right now, in our present reality? You see, Mimamsa isn't just about casually reading ancient texts. It's this rigorous, intensely logical system built from the ground up entirely to decode them.
So let's lay the groundwork. To really grasp why this school fractured so dramatically, we first need to understand what held them together in the first place. The term Mimamsa itself translates to revered thought. Now, unlike Vedanta, which you probably know focuses on the knowledge sections of the Vedas, Purva Mimamsa is exclusively 100% dedicated to the Karma Kanda. That's the ritualistic sections, specifically the Samhita and the Brahmana. For the Mimamsakas, the Vedas are eternal. They are the ultimate authority, and their entire purpose is to compel us towards specific actions. The foundational framework for all of this was laid down by Maharishi Jaimini in his absolute masterwork, the Mimamsa Sutra. Later on, a truly brilliant thinker named Sabara came along and wrote the Sabarabhashya, which was this massive, comprehensive commentary on Jaimini's sutras. Up to this point, the school is actually pretty unified. But, as you'll see, it was the interpretation of Sabara's commentary that ended up igniting a massive philosophical explosion. And that brings us to the main event. The great intellectual duel. This is where the story gets really interesting. Enter our two protagonists. On one side, we've got Prabhakara. He represents the school of thought known as the Guru Mat. And on the exact opposite side, we have Kumarila Bhatta, championing the Bhatta Mat. Now, both of these guys were devout Mimamsakas. Both completely dedicated their lives to upholding the authority of the Vedas. But they fundamentally disagreed on, well, pretty much every single metaphysical and epistemological detail of how the universe actually operates. And this brilliantly illustrates just how incredibly deep their divide was. Just look at how they categorized reality itself. Prabhakara accepted 5 pramanas, or sources of valid knowledge, and 9 basic substances, the dravyas. Kumarila Bhatta, on the other hand, was like, nope, we need more. He expanded a ledger. He added a 6th pramana, anupalabdha, and bumped the substances up to 11. Most remarkably, Kumarila categorized darkness and sound as actual independent physical substances, which naturally Prabhakara totally rejected. So how do we even know what we know? Let's get into the mechanics of knowledge, the epistemology of these two thinkers. What's super interesting here is this concept of intrinsic validity, or svata pramanya. Both Prabhakara and Kumarila actually agree that knowledge is intrinsically valid. It doesn't need some outside proof to be true. Its truth is entirely self-evident. But Prabhakara, he takes this to the absolute limit. He argues that the very nature of cognition is valid. Essentially, if you know something, that knowledge, by its very definition, simply cannot misrepresent its object. Meanwhile, Kumarila was absolutely obsessed with how we know what isn't there. And this is exactly why he introduced anupalabdhi, that 6th pramana we mentioned earlier. Think about it like this. Imagine you walk into your living room and instantly realize your favorite chair is missing. You didn't see the chair, right? You perceived its absence. For Kumarila, abhava, or non-existence, is a very real category, and we literally need a specific cognitive tool, anupalabdhi, to grasp it. Prabhakara, he thinks this is ridiculous. He argues we don't perceive absence, we just perceive the empty space.
Even their views on perception itself are completely opposed. Prabhakara proposes triputi pratyaksha. This is the idea that the exact moment you perceive an object, 3 things are illuminated all at the same time. The object you're looking at, yourself as the knower, and the knowledge itself. Boom! An instant flash of total awareness. Kumarila, however, argues for jnatattavada. He says knowledge is more of an indirect process, an act. You don't see the knowledge directly, you only infer that you know something because the object suddenly has this new property of cognizedness stamped onto it.
Okay, so that brings us to the million-dollar question about illusions and theories of error. This is arguably the most famous debate in all of Mimamsa.
Think about this for a second. If Mimamsa claims that all knowledge is intrinsically valid, and Prabhakara says knowledge can literally never misrepresent its object, then how on earth do we ever make mistakes? How do we look at a piece of shiny shell on the beach and mistakenly think it's a piece of silver?
Well, their answers couldn't be more different. Prabhakara defends his all knowledge is valid stance with Alkayati Vada, the theory of omission. He says when you mistake that shell for silver, you're actually having two completely valid but completely separate thoughts. You perceive the shiny object in front of you, and you remember silver from your past. Your error is just a failure to connect the dots. It's an omission. Kumarila calls this total nonsense. With Viparita Kayativada, he says error is an act of commission. It's a single, active misapprehension where you are actively projecting the wrong identity right onto that object.
We've covered the mind and the world, so let's shift gears to the final piece of the puzzle, the self and karma. Ultimately, who is the knower experiencing all of this?
So the crucial point here is how fundamentally different their views of the soul really are. For Prabhakara, the self is enchidrupa, which means essentially unconscious. He thinks consciousness is just a temporary, accidental quality that only pops up when the self interacts with the mind and body. Plus, he believes we should perform Vedic rituals purely out of a sense of duty. Just duty for duty's sake. Kumarila completely disagrees. He says the self is chidrupa, a mix of conscious and unconscious elements, constantly changing yet eternal. And as for motivation, Kumarila leans heavily into psychological hedonism. He argues we perform rituals because we desire the ultimate reward. We want heaven.
But wait, how does a ritual you perform today grant you a ticket to heaven years, maybe lifetimes from now? Well, both thinkers rely on this brilliant concept called apurva. Apurva is this unseen transcendental power generated by your actions. When you perform a Vedic ritual, the physical act ends, right? But it leaves behind apurva. It's this absolutely fascinating metaphysical residue, like a cosmic glue, that bridges the gap between your present karma and your future cosmic consequence.
Let's move to the practical side and see how this builds into the specific actions we actually take. Mimamsa classifies karma into 4 strict categories for everyday life. First, we have nitya karma, which are obligatory daily actions, like morning prayers. Then naimatika karma, which are required but only on specific occasions. Then there's kamya karma. These are totally optional rituals you only perform if you want a specific reward, like attaining heaven. And finally, nishita karma, which are the prohibited actions you absolutely must avoid to prevent negative consequences. And that leaves us with this final, really provocative thought. As you prep for your exams or just ponder these incredible ancient truths, I want you to ask yourself, where do you stand in this great schism? Do you side with Prabhakar, believing that consciousness is just a temporary spark and that duty exists purely for duty's sake? Or are you with Kumarila, believing in an ever-changing soul driven by the desire for the ultimate reward? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep learning, keep questioning, and I'll see you in the next one.